Thanks for staying with us. You're still watching the special broadcast celebrating Africa Day, the year 2022. And of course, our theme in News Central TV, we're looking at political stability, economic integration, and the future of the beautiful continent of Africa. And of course, on the first half of the first 30 minutes, we dealt with situations in West Africa. And right now, we move over to Eastern and Southern Africa, and we have our guest with us, Gbenga.
Yes, we have the pleasure of having Stephen Gruzd. He is the head of African Governance and Diplomacy Program. He joins us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you very much for joining us, Stephen.
You're welcome. Happy Africa Day.
Happy Africa Day.
We also have joining us live from Nairobi, Kenya, is Dr. David Matsanga, African Affairs Analyst. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Matsanga.
Thank you very much, fellow Africans, and thank you very much, all Pan-Africans watching this show and non-Pan-Africans across the globe. Thank you. You are welcome.
Now, I'd like to start with Stephen. Stephen, Southern African countries were the last set of countries to gain independence in Africa. Why is this? And also, was it really worth the independence? Because if you look at South Africa today, it's the most unequal society in the world. What is the point of getting flag independence when a lot of them are not economically emancipated?
Thank you. I think one of the reasons that it took so long for independence in Southern Africa was reluctant metropolitan powers. So, for example, Portugal, which controlled Angola and Mozambique, did not want to decolonize, and it took a coup d'etat in Lisbon in 1974 to spark the wars of independence in Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau and Angola. Most of the other Southern African countries were ruled by white settlers. So Rhodesia, which became Zimbabwe, Zambia, which was Northern Rhodesia, South Africa, and so forth. And so I think it just took time, and there was a sequence. So first it was the Portuguese-speaking territories, then Zimbabwe, then Namibia, and then South Africa. But I think you're right. There is a lot of inequality in this region. South Africa, as you say, has the greatest inequality in the world. The difference between the rich and the poor is very easy to see. One only needs to drive 5 kilometers from where I'm sitting now at Wits University to see people living with much less than their fellow citizens. And people are starting to question whether our constitution, our constitutional democracy is indeed the right recipe for prosperity, because it hasn't been very effective in changing the lives of ordinary people over the last, in South Africa's case, 26 or 27 years.
All right, now over to you, Dr. Matsanga. While we're celebrating Africa Day, of course, we celebrate the founding fathers of Africa. And we look at Eastern Africa, especially Ethiopia, where we have the headquarters of the African Commission. And recently, we know that the AU chairperson, of course, the Senegalese president, Macky Sall, actually went to, talked about discussions with Ukraine and Russia because of the war going on there. Meanwhile, there is still development and, of course, a civil war that has developed in Tigray. So how would you say the AU has been able to handle situations of civil war, especially in the East Africa region?
Thank you very much, my fellow panelists and presenter Rita and my brother. Thanks, first of all. If you ask me about AU is dead. It died. It is only limping and waiting to go to the grave. That's my position. And any African leader, head of state can challenge me on that, because I've also been there. I found AU was formed in OAU when I was born. But we have killed AU. If the leaders came back, if one of the leaders came back on earth and saw what was happening at AU headquarters, he would die twice in the grave. So AU is dead. Point number 2, the war in Ethiopia, the war across the region, AU cannot even stop a single war. We have been in Somalia since 1991, AMISOM. We still pump in more and more and more troops, more money. We have turned this as a cow where we milk. We ask for the same people to give us what we should be having on ourselves. So when you talk about the AU died when Gaddafi went down. The AU followed to die when Mugabe went down. Those are the people speaking. Most of the leaders now fear even to speak. And for me, I'm not afraid of speaking because I have few years on earth to speak. France has taken over AU. The current chairperson from Chad, Mr. Dr. Mohamed Faki, has sold us the French. We can't do anything in Africa without proposition from France. When you go to elect a president, look at Sally. Now he's telling us that he's going to Ukraine. To do what? How can a Ukrainian president order African heads of state to come to the African Union that I want to address you? Who is he to address African heads of state whom we have elected? Why is the war in Ukraine being, put forward than the war in Somalia, than the war in Tigray, than the war in DRC Congo, than the war in Mozambique? Kagame had to send troops in Mozambique in order to quell the entire rebels who had been planted there, ISIS. Africa did not manufacture ISIS. ISIS was manufactured in Syria by the French. They are the people who supplied ISIS with arms in Syria. And then ISIS turned on them. So why has Africa paid the price? Every day we pay the price of other people. And then they come, look at Zimbabwe, where my brother is talking about. I agree with him when he says, if you drive outside Johannesburg, it looks like it is better to be in hell than to be in South Africa when you see the poverty that is around South Africa and Johannesburg. Look at Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was the basket for food for Africa. Ladies and gentlemen on this continent, Zimbabwe has been hammered sanctions. Zimbabwe has been killed by the same powers that come around and tell us, if you don't do this, we shall not do that. Zimbabwe has got diamonds. Zimbabwe has got gold. Zimbabwe cannot sell those diamonds because America says, if you sell those diamonds, we shall punish every country. Now, Macky Sall goes to Ukraine. As I finish, Macky Sall goes to Ukraine. America is threatening every African country. Any African country dealing with Russia will be blacklisted. Come on, Africa, come on. Let's be honest. Let me finish this point. Let's be honest. Why should an African country be sanctioned? Because it has nothing to do with the war in Ukraine. Apart from us, we sympathize with the people dying in Ukraine. That is very bad. But why should they be sanctioned? Because they are trading with Russia. The war is between Russia and Ukraine and the America and Europe and Ukraine. So why should we be dragged in? Thank you.
All right, Dr. Matsanga.
Thank you, Dr. Matsanga. I would like to bring in Stephen here. Now, Stephen, Botswana in the Southern Africa region has been a model for progress and prosperity for Africa. They've never been involved in any type of war and skirmishes, and they've continuously made economic progress and peace. What did Botswana do, and what lessons can the rest of Africa learn from Botswana?
Thank you. Botswana is a very small population. It has a wide area, but a population of around about 2 million, maybe a little bit more. So many African countries are much more populous than that, so there are many, many more mouths to feed. Yes, there has been political stability in Botswana. There has been prudent economic management. There's been less corruption than in many other developing states around the world. Botswana is quite a conservative society and manages funding prudently. Recently there have been tensions with the previous president who's fallen out with the ruling party. But I think there's a respect for human rights. I think there is a respect for democracy. Sometimes, there are things that definitely need to be paid attention to, including the environment. And it's a very dry country. It doesn't get a lot of rain, and it has to deal with droughts. But on the whole, it is leadership. And I think that's what it all boils down to, that they respect good governance, they respect the rule of law, and they see advantage in being stable and prosperous. And of course, a lot of the funding for Botswana has come from the discovery of diamonds. They're in a joint venture with De Beers, where they get 50%. The revenues are split between the government and the De Beers company. They are blessed to have these diamonds, but it's not an easy commodity to sell in the world today, because there are many more pressing needs. And just to maybe go on my fellow panelists, whether Africa likes it or not, we are going to be dragged into this war. It's going to affect our food security. It's going to affect our imports of fertilizer. It's going to affect our petrol price. It's going to affect our interest rates. It's going to affect our savings. So I don't think Africa can avoid being embroiled in the war. We've already seen a number of votes on the UN General Assembly floor where African countries have had to make a choice. And indeed, I think there's pressures from both sides for the support of the 55 African countries in the UN.
Now, sorry to, just before we move to Dr. Matsanga, you did mention something earlier. You talked about Botswana's population and its mineral rich, but if you compare Botswana to a country like Equatorial Guinea, they have a large reserve of oil and about the same size of population. So why isn't Equatorial Guinea a model? Why are they not as progressive as Botswana?
That's a good question. I mean, I think the difference is probably leadership. Equatorial Guinea, I think, is only known to post-independence presidents. Oil is a notoriously corrupt industry, and I think that the leaders of Equatorial Guinea have been more interested in lining their pockets and lining the pockets of the elite than this was the case in Botswana. Equatorial Guinea indeed is a small country, but I think also the inequalities are huge between those connected to the political elite, to the economic elite, and to the ordinary citizen.
All right, thank you so much, Stephen. Now back to you, Dr. Matsanga, while we're still looking at the progress made so far by African countries, and this time around, we're looking at the Eastern and Southern Africa regions. Now, how would you assess the level of regional cooperation in Africa? Now, that's aside the AU, but leaders coming together to grow the continent of Africa. How would you assess regional cooperation among the governments?
First of all, I thank you very much, and I want to tell my fellow panelists that it was not. He should have just said Equatorial Guinea is controlled by some other Western metros, and Botswana is controlled by the Americans. That's why there is very little corruption in Botswana compared to Equatorial Guinea or Guinea, whatever you call it. The French have taken over everything in Guinea. You can't say anything. They pay taxes to France, and in Botswana, taxes are within. The population of Botswana is 2 million compared to the population of South Africa or Zimbabwe or Kenya or Nigeria, which is 220 billion. So they have managed to be tough on corruption. Let's be candid. The corruption rates in Botswana are lower than any other African country. You don't touch the money of the government and go scot-free. But in most of these African states, you touch the money, you eat it, and you fly for a holiday in Mauritius and enjoy with your family and laugh at the people where you have stolen the money. So, coming to my question that you asked me, cooperation, integration. This word integration, it looks like its own paper. For example, my brother there in Johannesburg will know that a Ugandan going to South Africa has to carry a box of files to prove that he's going to go to South Africa and come back. When we introduced the passport for Africa, the African passport, the first country on the continent of Africa to refuse the African passport is South Africa. because they claim they are not. In fact, when you're in Johannesburg, I want to tell you frankly, my brother there, you say, welcome to Africa. They tell you, diplomats themselves and the ministers, they tell you, welcome to Africa. Then you ask, where have I come from? From planet Mars? I'm from Africa, in Nairobi or Uganda or in Ethiopia. So the integration itself and the cooperation among African countries is lacking. For example, it is much easier to go to Europe and sell your goods than to pass goods between Kenya and Tanzania. Yes, this is the truth. The Tanzanians under Magufuli never wanted some of the goods from Kenya to enter there. Kenyans working in Tanzania were treated as if, look at the Africans working in South Africa being killed as if they're animals. Nigerians, Cameroonians, Mozambicans, Zambians. The only people they don't touch in South Africa are we Ugandans, because we gave them a base to liberate themselves. But the rest of you people, they kill you. They kill Somalis. They are killing them in South Africa, and the government knows. So we have a problem here. And the biggest problem we have in Africa, until we remove those barriers, we still have custom barriers. You can't move goods from one country to the other. You have to fill papers bigger than an examination in Oxford or Canterbury, where I went. You would have a problem. You'd have a problem to fill documents only to move one good. Cooperation, integration is still very low among African states.
Dr. Matsanga, are these issues not discussed in the AU? I mean, they've been going on for years. What are African leaders doing when they meet at different forums in different parts of the world? They're always having conferences and meetings. What are they discussing? And are they trying to make any difference?
Can I be very candid to you that they go and show their perfumes? Because there's nothing there. What you tell me. Tell me what is the, for example, there has been a conflict in Cameroon where Amazonians have been killed. They are being killed by a 42-year-old leadership of Paul Biya. Nobody has brought a motion on the African Books Union to discuss the conflict of Cameroon. There has been Boko Haram killing people in northern part of where you are, in Madiguri, in the Kanu, those areas of the Sahara region. You only see people coming there with their suits and a good cloth. And then after that, 3 days, they shake hands. And then we go back. Nothing much comes out. I am even shocked that Cameroon is the leader of the Security Council of Africa. How can Cameroon, Paul Biya?
All right.
Okay.
Dr. Matsanga, while we're still looking at regional cooperation, let's look at Southern Africa. And I'm going to bring in Stephen right now, because we have the South African Development Community. So, Stephen, how well would you say that the SADC has done to improve the South African region, especially looking at South Africa, looking at all the things that South Africa is dealing with, talking about the KwaZulu-Natal floods, of course, the monumental flag, which caused a bit of chaos in South Africa. So what is the Southern African Development Community doing to help Southern Africa?
Thank you. I think it's important that these regional bodies exist. It's important for leaders to have a forum, a platform where they regularly go and discuss these issues and find ways to work together. And of course, South Africa being the biggest economy in the region is dominant, but it also is reluctant to lead sometimes. It's been called a reluctant hegemon by some analysts. It's also, I think, very much a club of states, just like the African Union, and therefore it's a club of leaders. And the SADC doesn't do very much that the member states haven't pushed for. So it doesn't really have very much independence and depends very heavily on its member states. And South Africa is one that pushes there. I mean, there's lots of, as my colleague said, a lot of protocols, a lot of meetings, a lot of documents and discussions. But on the ground, things are quite different. So I think the SADC headquarters in Botswana, in Gaborone, is seen as a bit remote from the people, but it is trying to look at all aspects of development. And I think it's an important body. But like you said, I think there are countries that do everything they can to keep themselves off the agenda of these regional bodies. Integration, I think, has happened in spite of bodies like SADC rather than because of it. I don't think they liaise very well with business on the whole. They're not brought in. They don't also connect with citizens. And so I think the feeling is that it's a bit remote. But SADC is facing new challenges. The war in Mozambique was mentioned, where insurgents have been in the north, in Cabo Delgado. They shut down oil exploration and extraction. Thousands of people were killed. Now SADC has put in troops. Now Rwanda has put in troops. But this is a very big challenge that SADC has never faced before.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Now, Dr. Matsanga, before we wrap things up, looking into the future, because it's part of the theme of our discussion here today, what will it take? And do you believe that Africa would produce leaders in the mode of post-independence leaders, the Nyereres, Sankaras, Sylvanus Olympio, Sekou Touré, and Kwame Nkrumah? What do we need to do to have a rebirth of those kind of leaders that have the interest of the people at heart? Because you look at countries like Equatorial Guinea. Obiang has been there for over 40 years. You did mention Paul Biya in Cameroon. In Congo, you have Denis Sassou Nguesso, and the Guineans just removed, what's the gentleman's name again? That was going for a third term in Guinea. So what do we need to do to produce those kind of leaders?
I think you forgot one country, in my own country, Uganda. We have been there for a long time.
Oh, yes. So, how imagine. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni.
I think that is very, how do we produce new leaders? First of all, before we go there is a problem here that we have. And my brother from South Africa will know that we are the external metros, the darker forces of the metros, who are dragging us into indirectly through to the war of Ukraine, are coming through regime change. Regime change around the region of SADC and South Africa. There is something smelling called a regime change. They cannot come with the army to take over, but they are coming in proxies. So that is a point that my South African professor should know, that the creation of AFCOM, for example, you create an office of AFCOM in Zambia. What are you going to use it for? Zambia is a landlocked country. What logistics are you going to bring? What ships will they anchor? The office of AFCOM could have been created in Maputo or Dar es Salaam or Durban or Djibouti, where it used to be. Why do you take it inside? You are trying to destabilize some country. And then let me be very honest. You are trying to destabilize Zimbabwe, and we are watching you.
Okay, staying on the question, so, Dr. Matsanga, yes.
On the question of what can be done to get new leaders, we need a renaissance. I think Africa needs a renaissance. Let's get a renaissance. Let's get new leaders. Which new leaders are not corrupt? Part of the problem of Africa is corruption is embedded. We have come into an area where you have a president who has been there for 42 years and grown a whole generation of 42 years. Imagine somebody in Cameroon who was 42 years when 1 year old when Paul Biya was coming to power. Today is 42 and he doesn't know any other history about Paul Biya. So what we need to do, the question you are asking me is leading me to somewhere that what do we do? Yes. Surely, what do we do? Do we come and remove this leader by force? Military coups are being condemned by the African Union, which does not only gives. My friend Mutare from Ghana was talking about giving us sanctions, small embargoes. It doesn't help. Let AU stand and say, some leaders in Africa, you are the one retrogressing democracy. And for me, I have a theory. I don't know whether the professor will agree. If I ever become a leader on the African continent, of which I will invite you for my celebrations one day if I am alive,
All
I
right.
will ban elections in Africa.
Okay, Dr. Matsanga, while we're looking at issues of election and, of course, political stability, I'll go over to you, Stephen. We're looking at the South African region and also looking at political stability. We look at governments and the fact that people these days lack trust in government, and we see a failure in electioneering periods. So how can we view the electoral process, especially in Africa and even in Southern Africa?
Yeah, because Dr. Matsanga just said he doesn't really believe in democracy, and lots of people are losing that trust in the institution of democracy.
I think one of the factors in Southern Africa is that many countries are led by former liberation movements. South Africa, it's the ANC, Angola, Namibia with SWAPO, ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, Frelimo in Mozambique. And there's a lot of talk about these regimes being past their sell-by date, out of touch, corrupt, but very strongly entrenched. And what we tend to have is a dominant party system in many of our countries. And elections are important. And SADC and the AU have standards that countries are meant to meet, and very little is done to encourage and enforce these elections. For example, in Zimbabwe, you have election after election after election where there is controversy, there is violence, there's mistrust in institutions, especially around elections. Other countries have had many peaceful elections. I think in South Africa, we've been very blessed to have an independent and efficient and impartial independent electoral commission. I can't say the same for many other countries in the region. But you have dominant parties, and then smaller parties don't appeal to the electorate. These are the parties that liberated the countries, and they still have a lot of pull and cachet. But they're coming to 30, 40 years in power in some of these countries, and they're getting a bit stale. And there's a lot of leadership contesting within the parties, which promotes political instability. And then opposition forces are very disunited, are very fractured. So even though a party may be unpopular, there doesn't seem to be a viable alternative to replace them. That's one of the important dynamics to understand in the Southern African region.
I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, gentlemen. This is where we wrap this up on this segment of our celebration of Africa Day. I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Stephen Gruzd and Dr. David Matsanga. Thanks for your insights and your contribution to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And let me tell you, there is no Chinese MP in walking with a briefcase in Africa. Why should Africa walk with big cars and big MPs taking our money? We should go back to the roots. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matsanga.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you very much, my brother from Johannesburg.
Thank you.